So, in a way, I think the challenge is to decide where to do the denser growth and to do it so beautifully and elegantly and convincingly that people want to be there. And that's the example. Any more? Yes, ma'am.
Maybe it's not a fair question, but...
It's okay. I like the unfair ones better anyway.
So there's a couple of questions.
Okay.
Were you surprised to see the speed bumps in Russia?
I was.
When you saw them, did something come to mind to say, wow, I could have done this to, or we still can do this to change that?
Yeah, you will actually not find speed humps like the ones on Shellmore in my street design book unless there's a page with an X through it that says don't do this. And that's partly because, first of all, it would be worth digging into what was really going on speed-wise and what people were trying to accomplish by doing it. I don't know the whole story. So I'm just guessing there. What could you do that would produce the behavioral result you're looking for without the combination of unpleasant experience and ugliness that the speed humps represent? There are several options. In fact, there's a big menu of them. They can include things like a neck down of the street space, basically moving curbs out, picking one place to drop out a couple of parking spaces, and moving the curbs out. If that had been done, and of course if it's done in an ion way, it would be done very elegantly, and it'd be the Southern Living magazine worthy version of a neck down. But if you did it with a granite curb, but you could make it nice. Assuming that its geometry didn't look like highway geometry, which to me, all those white chevrons that lead to the hump and the big yellow sign, that all looks like highway stuff. So now what's the message that we've sent? Go slower, and this is auto space. As a pedestrian, I'd rather see that speed control happen another way. But there's another part of the story. I'm actually kind of encouraged to see that some of the street designs are being modified over time. Like the mountable curbs that were put in a few places, and the trees have been adjusted in a few places. I hope that people do that here, because it will be better. Time will just be better if people feel willing to go in there and make little tune-ups and timely upgrades to the street scene over time. The speed humps, and that's not an upgrade, but it does say people were willing to come back and modify it, and that's the start. I hope that helps. Any other good controversies I can weigh in on? Yes, sir.
I love where you've done in a lot of your presentations that you can have this or you can have this.
Yeah.
What are some communities that, as an unpleasant or that we could say, oh, they did it a nice way, or it's going to end up looking like?
This is an interesting thing because in 1995 there were very few we could point to. There were some greenfield developments and a few historic district bounce back stories, but not a lot of examples of new development that made things better and now there are more. I think you're going to find yourself on Johnny Dodds Boulevard and on Coleman Boulevard having to retrofit a lot of the suburban shopping center debris, basically, of an old economic model that has to be replaced. And when you do, you want to look at places like Del Mar in Lakewood, Colorado, for it's on the Alameda Avenue corridor, how they dealt with the evolution of that space. Just to name one example. And there are surprising places. I hope that the Low Country stays what it has been for the last 20 years, which is kind of a boiling pot of examples. We tell people to come here to see the most examples they can find in a relatively short driving distance, one from another, of historic and newly created places. So, in addition to traveling other places to see things, I hope you travel to the ones that are close by. Scruffy little town of Port Royal, or the city of Beaufort, for example, have the town of Bluffton have great lessons to teach Mount Pleasant. And what will happen? You'll go see those and you'll say, wow, now I understand what the old village of Mount Pleasant was trying to teach me, or I understand what Trad Street or Water Street and the peninsula were trying to teach me. That's what will really happen. We don't send people to Paris to see Paris. Send people to Paris to see Mount Pleasant differently, so that they can do the Mount Pleasant version of the idea rather than the Parisian one. Although if you copy Paris, it's not that bad. Well, especially in places that are storm prone, it's a great thing to put the overhead utilities underground. It's an expensive thing to do. But I noticed on this trip that the power lines that have bothered me the most about Ion, which are the ones that were cut through the trees on Mathis Ferry Road, were buried. And you know, at the time of the Ion charrette, we were trying everything we could think of to do something about those power lines on Mathis Ferry Road. It's a good thing, actually, looking back on it. The developers felt, even though they were working on the Jordan tract and not on Mathis Ferry Road itself in the public road corridor, they felt like Mathis Ferry Road was their problem too. Upgrading it and protecting it was their job too, which I think is something we don't see nearly often enough as a developer ethic. And so we drew plans for relocating the wires, for burying the wires, anything except leaving them where they were. And now you come back a few years later and they're down. And I was really glad to see that. Be a great big tree canopy. I live in Miami. We have an appalling number of overhead utilities that basically have to be restrung after every major storm. And it's embarrassing. There are some of the big transmission lines that are hard to do that with. Coolants and saltwater intrusion and all sorts of other problems. So, but underground utilities are better. All right, that's all for tonight. Thank you very much for having me.